Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Ed Leaders Network live event. Presented by Gail Huizinga, we're going to be looking at changing lanes to excellent, effective literacy instruction in Domain 3. My name is Arlen Peebles with the Illinois Principals Association, and I will be your host. I wanted to just take the first minute here to welcome you and draw your attention to a couple of items in your GoToWebinar control panel. The first one being your audio panel. Most of you are joined listening via your computer speakers. That is excellent, great way to listen in. If you do have any audio trouble at any time, there is the option there to switch over to a telephone. A conference call number will come up and you'll be able to dial in and listen that way, but only need that if you have any audio issues with the computer speakers. We also have a questions tab there for you to open up, and we encourage you to type your questions in as you think of them during the session. We've got some time at the end to address those, so if you think of something, want to ask Gail something or myself, go ahead and type it in as you think of it and send it through, and we'll handle those all at once at the end. Also, I emailed out a link to download the handout this morning. Hopefully you received that. If you did not, there is a handouts box there to open up, and you can click and download the handout for today so you can take notes during the session. This will also be recorded. We will be sending out a recording link to each of you and any other registrants who were unable to attend, as well as an evaluation form that once completed, you'll be able to download your evidence of completion for clock hours. I'll also be live tweeting today's event at the hashtag Changing Lanes. So any of you Twitter users out there, be sure to follow Ed Leaders Network, and you can follow the hashtag Changing Lanes to sort of capture some of what Gail will be sharing with us this morning. All right, I'd like to welcome our presenter, Gail Huizinga. Good morning, Gail. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you, Arlen, and welcome to everyone. Just a little bit about myself. I have over 30 years experience as a K-12 educator and administrator, and I currently facilitate professional learning workshops across the state in the areas of literacy and comprehension, teaching and learning. So I'm really happy that you've chosen to join me today. In order for me to know a little more about you, if you please indicate the grade levels you're currently evaluating in the poll, I'd appreciate it. So the poll is now open. For primary, elementary, secondary. It'll be interesting to see what levels we have, if we have a nice cross section represented.
All right, I'm going to close the poll and share our results here. Looks like we've got 40% primary, 70% elementary, 19% secondary, and 2% other. Thank you all for completing that poll.
Well, thank you, thank you. And just again, if you could submit what position you currently are holding in your role. If you're a principal, assistant principal, dean. I know we oftentimes have mentors that join us, sometimes teachers that are evaluators and administrators.
All right, for this poll, looks like we have got 70% principal, 20% assistant principal, no deans, 4% mentor, and 14% other.
Okay. Oh, all right, great. So we have a nice cross section there again. Well, good. Thank you for that. We all know that teaching has changed over the years, and this table illustrates the paradigm shifts that are required to meet those new 21st century learning standards. Just take a moment to read through this table and kind of jot down a few things you notice about the shifts between the paradigms. This handout, this is also in your handout. So what do you notice about the shifts in the paradigm? You know, one thing that you might want to notice is this new paradigm requires exchanging of information rather than just delivering it. So proficient teachers or excellent teachers no longer can really solely utilize that stand and deliver model of instruction. They really have to incorporate those open-ended questions and discussion techniques. So I hope you realize that the 21st century learner requires instruction that's varied and engaging, and it follows really a more constructivist approach where the learning has to be released to the learner. So today, We'll analyze the critical components of excellent instruction, specifically within Domain 3, and what shifts need to occur. And we'll look at ways that you as instructional leaders can support those shifts, as well as the teacher and student moves one should observe in that highly effective instruction. Now, at this point, I'd like to take a brief moment to mention that the default evaluation tool in Illinois is based on the Danielson framework. However, some districts have created their own tool, and it's been my experience that really most of the same domains and similar components are in there as the default. So this session is based on the components of the Danielson framework, but should your school district be using a hybrid, it really shouldn't hinder our conversations today. We're all striving to improve teaching and learning. That's our goal. Now, the Charlotte Danielson framework of teaching was created to provide a shared understanding of the art of teaching. That's because teaching is very complex, and it's helpful to have a roadmap through that territory. The framework provides a common professional language, and this is the language that should be used as the basis for conversation about improving one's craft. So it's important that educators and evaluators view this evaluation process as an ongoing and formative process, and not solely as a summative one. So how can teachers change lanes on the evaluation tool? What attributes need to be present for that change? Well, there are very specific expectations in the framework that one must be aware of. First, it's a given that high-level learning requires high levels of instruction. So teachers really have to have a very deep and flexible understanding of their content in order to help the students move beyond memorization to analysis and interpretation. Second, there has to be a really solid framework for learning where the students share the responsibility for their learning and understanding. It's been proven that that constructivist approach, again, to teaching provides the strongest framework for learners. It's because it recognizes that the learner is the one that's doing the learning. The third expectation is the lesson purpose is central to the instruction. The learning outcomes that have been planned for provide that organizational structure, and they guide all the decisions the teacher makes throughout the learning process. And the final expectation is that teaching should be seen as professional work with privileges and obligations. And the professional implications are evident throughout the document. Now, this table lists keywords that would best describe the 4 performance levels of the evaluation tool. Note that the level of cognition or constructivist learning increases as one moves from that more teacher-directed stance at level 3 to a student-directed stance at level 4. So a proficient teacher, which would be level 3, is very consistent, clear, positive. They are very much in control of what's going on in the classroom at all times. An excellent teacher, or level 4, is also very much in control of their classroom, but they subtly relinquish some of that control to their students, and the teacher becomes a facilitator rather than a director of learning. And I think the comparison of these two words, successful versus subtle, best illustrate that shift. When the focus moves from the teacher being successful to them being subtle, the student's role in the learning process increases. And so then the students need to take on more leadership and ownership of the learning. Now, as evaluators, you have attended hours of training on the use of the evaluation tool. But as learners of that information, you possess varying levels of knowledge. So I'd like you to reflect on your knowledge of the assessment process or the evaluation process. What level are you at? Are you at the declarative level of knowledge? Well, this means it's like studying the rules of the road book prior to taking your test. You can identify elements of safe driving, but you really can't make that strong connection because you haven't had a lot of experience driving yet. So in terms of the evaluation framework, you may be familiar with the elements of the domains, but you're really unable to make strong connections to classroom practice. Or you might be at the procedural level. Procedural knowledge is like driving with a driver's ed teacher. You know, you're more comfortable with the procedures because someone is telling you to slow down when you approach that stop sign, or be aware of cars around you as you change lanes. As evaluators, this means that you're comfortable with the domains and their function within the evaluation system. And you really can identify good instruction when you see it demonstrated. But just like your students, we hope that eventually reach that conditional knowledge. This is where you're ready to take the wheel and you take the keys off your counter and off you go. You can anticipate your moves and you've developed instincts for driving. So conditional knowledge of the evaluation process means you've had experience with the tool and you've established protocols. And instructional best practice is something that you really can discern quite easily. So in poll number 3, I'd like you to reflect, and what level do you think you are in terms of the evaluation tool and its expectations? Are you at the declarative, the procedural, or the conditional level? Take a moment just to reflect and respond to the poll. All right, so if we're at the declarative, we're just maybe a new administrator, a new evaluator. To the conditional, let's use the tool, because a lot of people have been using this tool for a number of years, so you're developing those instincts.
It looks like we've got 16% at the declarative level, 60% at procedural, and 24% at conditional.
Okay, great. So everyone will be looking for something specific to help them grow. As this slide indicates, Domain 3 is considered the heart of the framework. And it's really important to understand that all the domains should be viewed as in service of Domain 3. You know, we'll take a look at each of the components of Domain 3 and analyze what you might expect to observe in highly effective classrooms. So component 3A deals with communication with students. The teacher really has to set clear expectations for learning in a highly effective classroom. Setting and sharing that purpose helps the learner understand where the learning is heading. You know, the learner has to receive clear directions and explanations. And those directions can be presented orally, written, or a combination of the two. But if the communication is written, it has to be legible. And if it's verbal, it has to be audible. And the teacher also must provide very clear delivery of content and procedures to assist the students in understanding that content or the concept. As we can see from Dr. Marzano's quote, research really has proven that communicating a clear purpose does impact student achievement. So sharing of that lesson's purpose or outcome really should be one of the first pieces of evidence observed in a highly effective lesson. What teacher moves provide strong evidence of excellence in the 3A? Well, a teacher should set a very clear purpose for the lesson and then share that purpose with their students. When a teacher shares, this is what I want you to know and this is how I'll know if you've learned it, and then goes on to say, this is the learning process we'll go through, that's real strong evidence of backward design model. And so we want to see teachers sharing that, kind of communicating that with their students. Because the teacher is proficient in the content, they're able to point out possible areas of misunderstandings to their students. So statements such as, you may struggle here, so we need to slow down our reading, would be evidence of that kind of proficiency. And then being respectful of students' abilities means that they have really high expectations for their students' learning, as well as correct use of content and academic language. Now, to consider the student moves along with the teacher moves during your observation. In a high-performing classroom, students are aware of the lesson purpose, and they can relate that learning to the larger curriculum. And they're cognitive. They can monitor when they do and don't understand the concept or the content, and they can adjust their learning accordingly. And they can contribute to the learning and assist their classmates with their understanding. Now, please note, I want you to realize that communication is shared by the teacher and the students. In excellent classrooms, this is what we see. It's a shared skill. Some evaluators actually seat themselves near 3 or 4 students during an evaluation, and they can ask the students to explain what they're learning, or how will the teacher know that they've learned it, or what might he or she do if they don't understand it. I mean, their answers to these questions can indicate the level of communication between the teacher and the learner. They're really quite telling. Evidence of any teacher tool that communicates the purpose for learning is really highly effective and empowers the learner. So agendas, they provide a clear, consistent lesson structure. The students know what to expect throughout the class or activity so that they don't have to worry about what's coming next. They can focus on the learning. The presence of I can statements, skill statements, really encourage the students to monitor their own understanding so they can then communicate what they need to do to reach their academic or social goals. And then class meetings encourage a collaborative culture within the classroom. Any evidence of student-generated expectations or rubrics really demonstrate the student's contribution to the learning environment. A highly effective communication tool is reflection, and I really don't think it's used to its fullest. The reflections can be initiated by the teacher or ultimately student-generated. Note the examples on that slide. They really ask the learner to reflect on the learning process and not the content. These types of reflections really build the student capacity as metacognitive learners and independent learners. As you can see, the teacher would ask, how did this strategy work for you as a learner? Or really, what kind of feedback, important feedback will they get if they ask the students, did I model enough for you? And so we have that reflection not only for the teacher, but eventually the student. How did my understanding change or develop throughout this lesson? This is really best practice. As Danielson believes, reflection should become a habit of mind. And so if it's an important practice for teachers, why not for our students? So 3B, using questioning and discussion techniques. Questioning and discussion techniques are the only instructional strategies mentioned in the framework. That's important. High-level questioning and varied discussion techniques really promote that active inquiry-based learning, which is required if one's teaching paradigm is in alignment with those 21st century learning shifts that we saw earlier. Excellence in this component really elevates a monologic classroom to a dialogic classroom. And we need to think back to those level 4 key words that we saw a few slides ago. You know, student participation and leadership are hallmarks of excellence in classroom instruction. So as you evaluate, look at the instructional stance of the teacher. In a monologic classroom, there's really only one central speaker and one perspective. You know, teaching from a monologic stance has the teacher really concerned with transmitting of knowledge and maintaining control of the talk, versus a dialogic classroom in which there are lots of open-ended questions and extended exchanges among students. You know, that dialogic teacher is really concerned with learning through exploration and collaborative talk. And there is where you see the teacher facilitate the conversation and not control it. So in 3B, strong teachers really build on student understandings to go deeper. And they know the value of discussion, and they provide time for their students to discuss before, during, and after a lesson. And they utilize that constructivist approach. You know, they take on that role of facilitator rather than deliverer. And I think this is really where you'll see evidence of subtlety in delivery. Because of their really thoughtful planning and lesson structure, once that teacher enters the room, they're really simply implementing their plan. And then that plan guides every instructional decision they make throughout the learning. Now, the student moves are that they initiate higher order questions and that they invite comments from their classmates during discussions, and they really challenge one another's thinking, and they value discussion and questioning as comprehension strategies. They look forward or invite opportunities to have those conversations. But you really need to remember that we can't assume that students come to us fully able to do this kind of work. We really have to provide direct instruction of skills. We really feel that will get them to that high level of discourse. So an example of a slide like this will illustrate the effective use of Bloom's 6 levels of questioning. You know, they span the gap between those convergent types of questions, which is level 1, where they have really only one right answer, to those really high-level divergent questions, which really lead to rich thinking and conversations. Now, very often, teachers have difficulty creating these types of questions at a high level. So the use of a questioning format such as Bloom's will support their instructional growth. Now, highly effective teachers really know that direct instruction in question making using simple question stems such as these will really support their students' inquiry skills. So it's important that these are shared not only with the teacher but with the student as well. We have to provide the students these scaffolds that will eventually become intrinsic so that we can release that learning to them. So what I'd like you to do is reflect on the classrooms you've visited and observed. What questioning and discussion stances would be observed in the majority of your classrooms? Are they the monologic in nature where there's only one central speaker and one perspective? That's where you see all conversations going through the teacher. The teacher initiates, the students respond, and then the teacher evaluates that response. Or are they more dialogic in nature where the teacher takes on the role of facilitator and there's an abundance of that open-ended questioning? Which one do you see the majority of in your buildings?
Okay, looks like we've got 77% with the monologic classroom, and 23% believe the majority of teachers are utilizing dialogic classroom.
Okay, so we really need to support teachers in gaining those skills in questioning that will really promote that deeper learning. Questions such as, instead of saying, that's right, responding to a student's response or evaluating a student's response, they might want to then begin asking, why do you think that? Or does anyone agree or have another perspective? And then have a variety of discussion techniques to provide opportunities for that discourse. We really need to watch who's doing the majority of the talking in the classroom. That's what we want to be working on with our teachers. And really, in the second half of 3B, that discussion, it really has a major effect not only within the classroom, but within the school community as well. Judith Langer did a 5-year study to determine the characteristics of effective and less effective high schools, and they based their results on high-stake tests and class grades, and their findings were irregardless of demographics. In more effective schools, discussion was far more prevalent than recitation. And students really took on that leadership role because they asked more questions and were really more responsible for leading their own discussions. So those results really prove the importance of creating that collaborative culture not only within the classroom, but within the school itself. And it really says a great deal about the social emotional climate of the school. Now, good discussions really rely on seeds for conversation. They just don't happen. Annotation techniques can provide those seeds. This is a glimpse into a 6th grader's brain while comprehending this informational text. The student is questioning and visualizing. They're questioning on the right-hand side. They're asking, is that why they look all brown? And they're visualizing down in the lower left-hand corner of a mummy being wrapped. And they're reflecting as they engage with the text. Over on the right-hand column, the student's saying, that's gross. And so her annotations will be her seeds for conversation when given an opportunity to meet with others in the class, such as this student. His annotations are much more straightforward. He's really summarizing each paragraph. He's not as animated, he's not visualizing, but he is still engaging deeply with the text. So when these two students get together to discuss their annotations or seeds, really grand conversations are going to happen. The student on the left is going to get answers to their questions, and the student on the right is possibly going to get his thoughts challenged. So either way, they're helping each other create meaning. So in your handout, I've listed some small group structures and text discussion activities that will really support effective instruction in Component 3B. Or these might be things that you see evidence of that will really show you excellence in instruction, such as book clubs and literature circles and Socratic seminars, or text discussion activities such as those text annotations, or think, write, pair, share, or 3-minute pause. All of those different kinds of discourse techniques that will help. So take a moment just to jot down for yourself a few reasons why questioning and discussion are vital to a teacher's performance. Why does it have its own domain? They are the only instructional strategies specifically referred to. Skilled questioning techniques really take the learner's thinking to a deeper level. The teacher can guide that thinking as well as support it through those questions. And discussion has much the same results when well structured. It really provides that students the opportunity to help each other create meaning. So you want to support your teachers with their questioning and discussion. I hope you had an opportunity to jot down a few reasons why. You want to keep those in mind as you go back and work with your staff in their pre and post conferences. You want to look at the types of questions and the opportunities they're providing for discussion. Again, who's doing the majority of the talking during that lesson? If domain 3 is the heart of the framework, then 3C is really the heart of domain 3. The critical attributes of that component are the instruction really stresses depth over breadth. They encourage students to explain their thinking and really provide opportunities to go deeper with their learning. And the lesson instructional materials and resources are carefully chosen to match the purpose and the learner. And there really should be a very clear arc of learning for each presentation. The teacher knows where they want to go, and that arc is assuring that it's getting there. So the lesson really has to have a well-structured pacing and structure, well-designed, I'm sorry. And then the pacing needs to provide time for direct instruction and practice, as well as collaboration and closure and reflection. Very important that they provide time for closure and reflection and not teach right to the bell. And then the structure needs to be predictable and well thought out. So as we look at engagement itself, here are two definitions of the word engage. Take a moment to read them, and then in the poll, indicate what is the type of engagement we want to see in our classrooms. Which of these definitions will have a greater impact on engaged instruction in the classroom? 1 or 2? Do we want them to be captured and grabbed, or take part and join in? All right, we want to be thinking of the evidence that we would gather for each of these.
Okay, Gail, looks like we've got only 7% choosing definition 1 and 93% choosing definition 2.
And thank you, Arlen. And very often, people feel that both of these need to occur, that the teacher does need to grab those students and catch their interest, and then get them to take part in. So some of that 7% very well may feel that both of these are appropriate. But we have to think about the evidence that we're looking for. What is the evidence of capturing and grabbing? Because in that case, then the teacher has to maintain control. If they've captured them, they have to maintain that control. Versus evidence we might see for definition number 2, where the students are taking part in and joining in and playing a role. So we really need to ask ourselves, in terms of engagement, what are we striving for? Are we striving for containment or compliance, or are we striving for commitment to learning, which I feel is really what number 2 will give us. And we really can't confuse engagement with being busy and time on task. They've been at this for 20 minutes, so they must be engaged. Or activity. Some teachers think engagement, there needs to be a hum in the classroom. But really, there must be evidence of intellectual involvement, and really that mind's on task. It can be very quiet, very, very in depth. That's really what engagement should be defined as. Now, we're all searching for that holy grail of education, cue those angels, engagement. But that strong research-based philosophy believes that a learner is engaged and transforms or synthesizes information through these 4 ways, through writing, discussion, visualizing, and organizing. So that transformation or synthesizing of information really is what drives understanding deeper, because the learner has to change information from words into images, charts, and notes. Now, there is a format for engaged learning one can follow, and this one happens to be from Project Chris. And you can see that that first gold box is really where you introduce pre-work or front load the lesson. And then information is presented in those smaller chunks with these blue boxes of brief 3 to 5 active engagement opportunities inserted in between the learning. This replaces those really large spans of lecture, and the chunking of the lesson really does allow the learner to process smaller amounts of information and then transform it and make it their own. And then the process repeats itself. And we always have to make sure that there is time for closure and reflection at the end of the lesson. And this type of active engagement format has been proven to be successful because research really has shown us that there are limits to the amount of information the brain can absorb in one chunk. And Project Chris has really equated that to about 1 minute per grade in school. So an 8th grader really can process about 8 to 12 minutes of information effectively. And then they really need to stop and process or transform that through writing or discussion or visualizing or organizing. So please keep that in mind when conferring with staff about their lesson structure. Where are they stopping for that engagement or that transformation of information throughout the learning process? Because they'll really get much better results and deeper learning because of it. So the teacher moves in 3C, one should see in a highly effective classroom would be that really clearly defined lesson structure and pacing with evidence of that actual active engagement format, which provides for that chunking of the information. And the students are writing and discussing and visualizing and organizing information in some way throughout the lesson. And then the tasks the students are given really require high levels of rigor. So clear planning for those minds on task, as well as establishing a culture of persistence and collaboration, should really be present. And then, of course, scaffolds are critical for challenging content. But we really need to make sure that there is a balance so that teachers don't over-scaffold and that they allow students to develop that cognitive sweat. In order to be persistent, they have to struggle a bit. So we want to be careful that we don't over-scaffold the information. Now in 3C, students are provided the tools to take ownership of the learning in highly effective classrooms. You know, they're really metacognitive learners who can self-monitor and self-assess their own learning. And they take ownership and are persistent, you know, that cognitive sweat again with challenging content. And that they contribute to the collaborative culture the teacher has established by really being interested and enthusiastic members of that learning community. So if discussion and writing and visualizing and organizing are evidence of engagement, then graphic organizers really do help that learner organize their thinking. So, you know, we've all seen the positive effects of graphic organizers and what they've had on student learning. So I'd like to highlight one in particular, the RAN, Reading and Analyzing Nonfiction. Now, this graphic organizer can be used in any content area. I've used it with videos, I've used it with musical pieces, I've used it with artwork, and not just written text. So it also really addresses multiple college and career readiness standards, which I'll show you. So as I take you through this chart, in the first column, the learner brainstorms what they know about the topic. And then the learner engages with the text. After that first engagement, then in the next 2 columns after that engaging with the text, they record what was confirmed from the first column, or what misconceptions they still might have, or what they couldn't prove. And this process then really addresses reading informational text 1, standard 1, you know, site-specific textual evidence when reading or speaking. So then the teacher would have their students engage with the text again, but for a very different purpose this time. So in the final 2 columns, the learner records any new learning, as well as questions they still have. And the comment core really encourages wearing out of a piece of text, that multiple reading, going deeper and deeper each time with a different purpose. So you can see here with this graphic, they've already engaged with the text 3 or 4 times, and depending on how the teacher uses it. So that final two columns really addresses Reading Informational Text Standard 7, where they integrate and evaluate content. And that last question column really addresses the writing standard for research, which is standard number 7. So this is really a very useful engagement tool, and teachers have had great success with it throughout all of the content areas. Now, in your handout, there are a number of engaging instructional strategies that address the 4 engagement components of visualizing, discussion, organizing, and writing. So there are varied organizers, there's discussion strategies, reciprocal teaching is mentioned, and they're really all options teachers can employ or you may observe in a classroom as evidence of engagement. Now, I've shared that being engaged really does require the learner to be involved in transforming information in some way. So I'd like you to think about a lesson you observed, and as you sat there or when you left the room, you thought, wow, am I glad this person works here? Think about a lesson that might have made you say that, and visualize what the students were doing throughout that lesson. What was the teacher doing throughout that lesson? And what were the learning targets and were they met? Reflect on that lesson quickly. Now, reflect on the evidence you gathered during that lesson regarding engagement. Did the teacher provide time for the learner to engage and transform the information in some way through writing, discussion, visualizing, and organizing? Think about that. Were they able to get the learner to join in and, more importantly, take an active role in the learning? Or did they simply hook the learner in and were they occupied in an activity? This is the difference you need to distinguish as an evaluator. Are you gathering evidence of successful containment or excellent facilitation leading to commitment to learning? You need to determine the difference between the two. And then you need to support teachers' growth in that shift. So I hope you had an opportunity to reflect and jot a couple of things down before we go on. Because I think that's really the key to 3C, is recognizing the difference. So component 3D deals with using assessment and instruction. And those assessments should really serve 2 purposes. They should promote learning through teacher monitoring and student self-regulation. And again, that student ownership is a goal we should all have. And they should provide effective feedback. And this feedback should be targeted, and it should be accurate and constructive and timely, just like we would, hope for our teachers through the evaluation process. Now, the proficient and excellent teacher moves show that they are very successful in distinguishing between that assessment of learning and assessment for learning. Those teachers, their assessments are fully integrated into the lesson and they're seamless. They walk around, they observe, and they confer regularly with their students. And they utilize a variety of assessment tools, formal and informal, to gather that information on data. But I really want to note that the excellent teacher really goes that one step beyond and teaches their students those skills for monitoring their own learning. Because students also have a responsibility within the assessment realm. They really need to clearly understand the characteristics of that high quality work, and actually they should have helped to develop the criteria for it. And then monitor their own understanding, when provided the skills to do it. And then they need to evaluate and, more importantly, incorporate feedback into their work. And that's why reading and writing workshop models are so effective, is because they provide that opportunity for students to get the feedback and then incorporate it into their reading and writing. So as teachers work within this formative assessment stance, they have lots of strategies and tools to work from. Successful teachers really do assess carefully, and they create just the just right assessment, to inform that instruction and support the learner. Because it's important to note that not all assessment types are a good match for the task one's assessing. So in your handout, there's a really extensive list of the types of tools that one can use, as well as some specific examples. Now, that cache is ones that students, this is where the questions the students will ask of themselves. So we're starting to build the capacity for students to self-monitor and self-regulate their learning. And then there's a website from the West Virginia Department of Education that really is a wonderful resource for formative assessment tools. Margaret Heritage, I really like this quote and this analogy that she makes. She says that people still think about delivering instruction to children as if they were mailboxes into which learning has been delivered. And I've seen that. I'm sure you've seen that, where here it is, here it is, here it is. But that lane changer really is where you teach the students to assess, self-monitor, and self-regulate. So they are really empowered learners. That is what we're striving for. Now, throughout this session, I've tried to give you versatile examples of tools you might share with your staff. 2 stars and a wish are one of those assessment techniques. They could really be used in all grade levels and content disciplines. The example on the screen is really for primary and elementary, but this can be used in all grade levels. And depending on the contributor, it really can be used as either a self-assessment, a peer feedback tool, or a teacher feedback tool. In this case, as you can see here, this is teacher feedback, so the 2 stars they've given in the wish are dealing with the child's handwriting. The use of rubrics also allows the student to self-monitor and self-assess throughout that learning process, which we know is very important. And the example on the right, what stuck with you this week, that really is an opportunity for student reflection, so that they can think about their learning and what they've done, what they've learned deeply. And it also provides feedback, not only to the student, but to the teacher as well. Now, Wikispace's Classroom and Padlet, these are writing workspaces that your teachers will really love. And they're formative assessment tools they'll really use, because they can provide feedback electronically as the learning is in progress. And the best thing is they're free. We like free. Now, the final component in Domain 3 is 3E. The teachers really have to demonstrate flexibility and responsiveness within their teaching stance. So when a teacher possesses that strong content knowledge and pedagogy, it really does allow for that flexible instruction. And they can capitalize on those teachable moments that really enhance the learning. They recognize when an instructional activity isn't working, and then they acknowledge the need for an alternative approach if necessary. So when their efforts aren't enough, they actually seek out others than the school or really beyond for assistance to fully support their students. Now, the student moves, their primary responsibility in this component is to be cognizant of comprehension breakdown and communicate their lack of understanding to the teacher. But again, this level of communication really only happens in classrooms where the teachers value the importance of teaching students self-assessment skills. So you want to really make sure that your teachers understand that that is a key component of excellent instruction. Now, we all understand no one single approach to instruction or intervention can address the needs of all students, especially those with different cultural and linguistic backgrounds. So in 3E, the teacher really needs to fully know their students and their needs. They must be able to accommodate them within all learning situations. So at this point, I'd like to give you a moment to reflect on what are 1 or 2 big ideas you'd like to take back to your building. For example, one might be that each of the domains have specific teacher and student moves that one has to focus on. And there is a role the students play in the learning process. Or maybe how you will, as an instructional leader, support teachers' growth in that area. So reflect on 1 or 2 ideas you'll take back and share or implement. Here again is where you're building your capacity as a learner. And reflection is important. So please feel free to continue with your reflection. But before I close, I'd like to make a connection between John Hattie's research from Visible Learning for Teachers to the Danielson Framework. He's created a list of the top 10 influences in the classroom that impact student achievement. As you can see on this slide, 6 of the top 10 are addressed in Domain 3. The only component not represented here is 3C engagement, and that's because that's where the faithful implementation of all of these others occur. So I'd like you to consider using John Hattie's work as a resource for your work with supporting teacher growth. He did some amazing research on that area. So as we end today, there's really 3 big ideas I'd like you to consider as you move forward in your work. As administrators and coaches and mentors, really stress the culture of collaboration and reflection throughout your schools. You know, it's important that the instructional focus shifts from teaching to learning, and stress those shifts in pedagogy from earlier in the session. You know, have conversations with your teachers about those shifts and what they look like and sound like in the classroom, and provide opportunities for teachers and students to reflect on how we teach and how we learn. And that's beyond the evaluation process. And then one strong practice might be providing time for those targeted conversations, possibly focusing on one domain component at a time to really delve deeper into its critical attributes. So this would be, you know, we have a few minutes left, so if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please feel free to do so. Arlen will relay those to me. And if you feel that you need to leave the session right now, I'd really like to thank you for your time, and good luck as you continue your work in school. So thank you again. And Arlen, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to remain on the line to try and answer those.
Yes, absolutely. We've got a question here from Mary. She asks, how do you convince teachers who work with young children, pre-K through 2, that these are skills their students are capable of doing?
Well, they're much more teacher facilitated, that's for sure. And they're not going to look the same as they would look at a 6th grade classroom. But they can start building that culture of collaboration and just possibly turning to someone else and sharing their ideas. That would be one way that they could do that. A lot of their learning is through play. And so that's a very social environment already. So just stopping them periodically or just conferring with those students and tell me what you're doing. Explain to me why you're doing that, to get students to be metacognitive of what they're doing and what they're learning. And maybe what has that center taught you today? So it's going to be more teacher directed, but kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade teachers and pre-K, they're the gatekeepers to all of this. They set the stage for these deep conversations that they will have later on in school. So it's very important that they try to do that. And as an evaluator, they may not know how to do it yet, so you need to look for opportunities for them to determine where they might be able to stop and just reflect, even if they just stop periodically and do that. I hope that answers Mary's question.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Gail. A couple more here. Nicole has asked that she would like to share this webinar with her staff, and will this be available after the session? And I can answer that for you, Nicole. Yes, we recorded this webinar, and we'll be sending out a link to view the recording and attaching the handout to that so you can share this with your teaching staff as well. It will also be archived on Ed Leaders Network for all future access as well.
Question? And it's important. Oh, I'm sorry, Carlin. I just wanted to add that the handout is not slide for slide, but it does have the crux of the most important information on it. So you want to mention that to your teachers as you noticed today as a learner. Thank you. Sorry.
And Adrian has asked, are there sites that can be accessed for teachers to see evaluating the domains? For example, actually watching videos to rate the teachers?
I would think you should look at the Danielson Group website. There are some videos there. The teaching channel also has a lot of videos of teachers during instruction. So that would be two sites that I would go to for sure. There's, let me see. I don't know that ISB has anything on there, but Illinois Classrooms in Action are also good resources. Illinois classroominaction.org, no spaces. That's through the content specialists for Illinois ISBE, so that would be another place that you might go. But Teaching Channel is a fine place to go for resources like that.
Yeah, we also have a series that those Classroom Voices, Classroom Voices learning series on EdLeaders Network. You don't necessarily, you get to see teachers in the classroom using, the new learning standards. You don't necessarily get to see anyone evaluating them or anything like that. But we do have video of teachers in the classroom on ELN as well.
And I would highly recommend that you start building the culture of teachers helping each other, and possibly having someone be willing to have their lesson videotaped and then sharing that. And I mean, that's a high risk situation, but there are teachers out there that might share a portion of their questioning, not the entire lesson. But if you have a teacher that does really well at questioning techniques, you might want to utilize them as a resource for the rest of your teachers and ask if they would consider videotaping themselves during a questioning session, and then allowing the teachers to view that. So I think, again, you have a lot of valuable resources within your building, and we need to utilize those and build the capacity of our teachers to help each other.
And Mike has also suggested that Teachscape can be purchased to allow teachers to see those evaluation videos.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Mike.
All right, any other final questions before we sign off this morning?
All right, well, thank you. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the luck going forward. I'm sure this is a very exciting time in education, so thanks again.
Yes,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gail, for sharing your wonderful presentation and content with us here this morning. I want to thank all of our attendees. As we said, this is recorded. You'll be getting a link shortly to access this recording, and you will also be getting a link to a evaluation, which once you complete, you can download your evidence of completion form for this webinar. And please feel free to visit edleadersnetwork.org to check out more professional development webinars just like this. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. You are free to close the GoToWebinar control panel.